The sea had been calm only hours before, a glassy expanse stretching endlessly under the golden glow of the sun. Ethan and Clara had been laughing on the deck of their small rented boat, their hair tousled by the salty wind, believing this trip would be nothing more than an adventurous escape, a memory carved into the pages of their marriage. But as the day slipped toward dusk, the horizon darkened in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten. Heavy clouds rose, swallowing the fading light, and soon the first deep growls of thunder echoed across the water. What began as a soft drizzle turned into a violent downpour within minutes, and the once playful sea transformed into a furious beast. Waves towered higher than their boat, each one crashing down with a force that rattled every plank and joint. Ethan clung to the railing with one hand and wrapped the other tightly around Clara's trembling shoulders. The wind howled like a living thing, ripping through the sails, tearing away control. Water lashed at their faces, stinging like shards of glass, and the deck tilted so violently that Clara nearly lost her footing. Her terrified cry was swallowed by the storm, but Ethan heard it in his bones. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating her face, pale, streaked with tears and rain, eyes wide with fear. The thunder followed instantly, booming like the sky itself had split apart. They were at the mercy of something larger than life, something merciless. The boat shuddered as if it were groaning under the weight of the waves, wood creaking and splintering in protest. Ethan's heart pounded, his muscles burning as he fought to keep them both steady. Clara clung to him, burying her face against his chest, and in that instant, Ethan felt the sharp stab of realization that he might not be able to protect her. For all his strength, for all his promises, he was powerless before the sea. The water surged higher, crashing over the sides, flooding the deck until their feet sloshed through ankle-deep torrents. The smell of salt and wood and fear filled the air. Then came the moment that would etch itself into their memory forever. A monstrous wave rose before them, taller than anything they had seen, blotting out the lightning-slashed sky. It loomed like the hand of fate, curling over, ready to strike. Ethan braced, pulling Clara close, whispering her name though his words vanished into the storm. The wave came down with a deafening roar, slamming against the boat. The world became water, crushing and suffocating, dragging them apart. He felt Clara's hand slip from his, swallowed by the force, and then he was underwater, spinning in blackness, lungs screaming for air. When he finally surfaced, coughing and gasping, the boat was gone, shattered, splintered pieces bobbing in the churning waves. Panic stabbed him as he screamed Clara's name into the storm, his voice ripped away by the wind. For a heartbeat, he thought she was gone, that he had lost her to the sea. Then, faintly, through the crashing water, he caught a glimpse of her, clinging desperately to a piece of driftwood, her head barely above the waves. With every last shred of strength, Ethan swam toward her, fighting the pull of the current until he reached her side. He wrapped his arm around her, refusing to let go again, even as the ocean hurled them mercilessly toward the darkness. They were at the mercy of fate now, two fragile souls in a vast, raging sea, clinging not just to life, but to love. Friends, if this story touches your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more heartfelt tales. Ethan awoke to the harsh glare of sunlight stabbing into his eyes, the sound of waves gentler now but still relentless as they broke against the sand. His mouth was dry, his tongue swollen from salt, and every muscle in his body ached as if he had been beaten by invisible fists. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then memory came crashing back, the storm, the boat, the wave, the suffocating blackness. His heart jolted with fear as he rolled over, coughing up seawater, eyes frantically scanning the shore. Panic gripped him when he saw no one, only the wide, empty expanse of sand and scattered debris. But then, a few yards away, he spotted Clara's still form tangled in seaweed, her hair spread like a dark halo across the wet sand. He crawled to her, his arms heavy, his legs numb. When he pressed his ear against her chest, his world stopped until he heard it, the faint, steady thump of her heart. Relief surged through him, his breath shuddering as tears stung his eyes. She's alive, he thought, clinging to her as if the ocean might come back to claim her. Clara stirred faintly, coughing, her lips cracked, her face ghostly pale. She whispered his name, and though her voice was fragile as wind, it was enough to steady him. The first hours were consumed by survival instincts. Ethan knew they needed water, and fast. He half-carried Clara inland, stumbling past the line of palms into the dense green of the jungle. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen life. Every step seemed to crackle with menace as leaves rustled overhead and unfamiliar cries echoed from the trees. At last, through the tangle of roots and vines, he heard the sound of trickling. A narrow stream glistened, cutting through the undergrowth like a silver ribbon. Clara fell to her knees beside it, cupping her hands to drink as though she were touching life itself. Ethan drank too, the cold sweetness burning down his throat like fire extinguishing thirst. But survival came at a cost. They had no food, no shelter, no tools. The heat pressed down like an invisible weight during the day, and insects swarmed them relentlessly. Their soaked clothes clung to their bodies, chafing their skin raw. By nightfall, exhaustion drove them back to the beach where they collapsed in the sand, shivering as the wind whipped through the darkness. Strange cries echoed from the jungle, and shadows seemed to prowl just beyond their sight. Ethan pulled Clara close, wrapping his body around hers, promising himself he would not let fear consume them. The first day ended not with triumph, but with fragile hope, the kind born from simply surviving another sunrise. By the third night on the island, Ethan and Clara had managed to build something resembling a shelter. It was nothing more than a shaky frame of branches covered with broad palm leaves, but it gave them the illusion of safety against the endless darkness that pressed in when the sun went down. Ethan had scraped together dry twigs and kindling until he coaxed a small fire into life, its fragile flames flickering and crackling like their last defense. Clara sat close to it, her knees drawn up to her chest, eyes fixed on the light as if it alone kept her tethered to hope. Beyond the ring of firelight, the jungle loomed, a wall of black shadows alive with whispers, clicks, and cries from creatures they couldn't see. Ethan sat awake, every sense sharpened by tension, every rustle in the leaves making his pulse quicken. The night felt heavier than usual, the air thick with something unspoken, as though the island itself was holding its breath. Clara, exhausted, drifted into restless sleep beside him, her head on his shoulder. He stroked her hair absent-mindedly, but his eyes never left the forest's edge. That was when he heard it, a deep, guttural growl rolling low through the trees, primal and terrifying. It was not the call of a bird or monkey. It was the sound of hunger. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps. Ethan's stomach knotted as two faint, glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, catching the light of the fire. The creature, whatever it was, stayed just beyond the shadows, circling slowly, the firelight glinting in its gaze. Clara stirred in her sleep, and Ethan's body tightened protectively around her. His hand reached for the nearest thing he could use as a weapon, a thick branch, one end smoldering from the fire. He held it aloft, heart pounding so hard he thought it might betray him. The predator paced, its presence suffocating, its growl vibrating through the ground. At one point, it crept closer, its silhouette briefly visible, large, sleek, muscular, a beast built for the hunt. Ethan thrust the flaming branch forward, the sudden flare of light breaking the darkness in a defiant gesture. The animal snarled, a sharp, savage sound that made Clara jolt awake, clutching at Ethan in panic. For what felt like hours, the standoff dragged on, firelight against shadow, man against beast. Then, with a final hiss, the creature retreated into the jungle, its eyes vanishing like embers snuffed out. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan exhaled shakily, lowering the branch, his arms trembling. Clara buried her face against his chest, her tears soaking through his shirt as she whispered in fear. That night, they understood fully, the island was not empty. They were not alone. Days melted into weeks, each sunrise bringing new trials that carved exhaustion deeper into Ethan and Clara's faces. Their bodies grew lean, their skin blistered under the relentless sun, and their once bright spirits dimmed under the weight of endless survival. Every step through the jungle felt heavier, every night more suffocating as they huddled by their fragile fire. Clara, who had once filled their life with laughter and light, grew quieter with each passing day. Her cheeks hollowed, her movements slowed, and her eyes, once sparkling with hope, now seemed shadowed with despair. Ethan noticed it in the way she stared out at the horizon for long, silent hours, her lips moving in prayers or whispers he couldn't hear. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the sky and painted the ocean like a sea of fire, Clara's voice cracked in a way Ethan had never heard before. She wept openly, clutching her knees to her chest, and confessed her greatest fear, that no one would ever find them, that their love story would end in silence on this forgotten patch of earth. Ethan's heart broke at her words. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep, that they would go home, that this was only temporary, that love was stronger than the sea, stronger than despair. His voice trembled with the weight of desperation, but Clara clung to him, soaking his shoulder with tears, as if his arms were the last safe place in the world. But the island had one more cruelty to unleash. Days of heavy rain had turned the air damp and the ground soft, the gentle stream that had once given them life swelling dangerously. Then, without warning, the skies unleashed a downpour that roared through the jungle. At first it was only water hammering the leaves, but within moments, it became a raging torrent. The stream overflowed, transforming into a violent flood that tore through the undergrowth with the fury of a beast. Ethan and Clara, who had been gathering fruit near the bank, were caught in its sudden path. The current was merciless, dragging at their legs, sweeping debris past them with terrifying speed. Clara screamed as the water surged around her waist, pulling her off her feet, carrying her toward the jagged rocks downstream. Ethan lunged, his hand closing around hers with a grip that burned his muscles. For a moment, he thought the force of the water would tear them apart again, just as the storm once had. But he planted his feet into the mud, refusing to let go, every vein in his body straining against the flood. Clara's terrified eyes locked onto his, and though her lips trembled, she saw it, the unshakable vow in his gaze. He would not lose her, not here, not now. At last, the storm subsided, leaving destruction in its wake. Their shelter was gone, their fire extinguished, their precious supplies swept away. They lay together in the mud, trembling, bruised, and stripped of everything they had worked for. Yet, as Ethan wrapped his arms around Clara, he realized something undeniable. The island could take their shelter, their comfort, even their strength, but it could not take their love. And in that moment, love became more than a word. It became their reason to rise again. The days after the flood dragged by like a cruel test of endurance. Ethan and Clara, stripped of everything they had built, clung to each other with a fragile determination that was equal parts love and desperation. They scavenged what little the island allowed, a handful of wild fruit, rainwater caught in leaves, a patch of dry ground beneath a fallen tree where they huddled through cold nights. Each sunrise felt like a question: how much longer could they endure? Clara's body was weakening, her frame thinner with each passing day, and Ethan's hands shook with exhaustion even when he tried to hide it. Yet in their quiet moments, when he brushed her tangled hair from her face or when she rested her head against his chest, they still found whispers of strength. The island had taken nearly everything, but it had not stolen the bond between them. One morning, when despair had nearly settled into permanence, a sound reached them, faint, almost swallowed by the ocean, but unmistakable. It was the low hum of an engine. At first, Ethan thought it was his imagination, a cruel trick of hope. But Clara's eyes widened, her head snapping toward the horizon. Together, they scrambled through the sand, their bare feet stinging against rocks, hearts pounding as the sound grew louder. And then they saw it, a small fishing boat, cutting steadily across the waves in the distance. Ethan's chest surged with adrenaline. They tore branches from a nearby tree, waving them wildly, screaming until their voices cracked. Clara's tears streaked down her dirt-stained face, her cries raw and desperate. Ethan lit the last of their dry palm leaves in a frantic fire, the smoke curling skyward like a plea. For agonizing minutes, the boat seemed too far away, too oblivious, moving as though it might pass them by. But then, mercifully, it slowed. Shouts carried over the water as figures pointed toward the shore. When the boat drew near, the fishermen's faces showed shock at the sight of the ragged couple waving frantically from the beach. Strong arms pulled them aboard, and Clara collapsed against Ethan, sobbing with relief. Salt spray mixed with her tears, but for the first time, they weren't born of fear. They were safe. They were found. As the boat turned away, the island shrank in the distance, its dark jungle and hostile cliffs fading into the horizon. Ethan and Clara sat side by side, hands intertwined, gazes fixed on the open sea. The island had tested them beyond imagination. It had stripped them of every comfort, pushed them to the edge of despair, and forced them to confront their deepest fears. Yet it had also revealed something indestructible. Their love, tested by storm and hunger and shadow, had not broken. It had only grown stronger. And as the boat carried them back toward the world, they knew they were not the same people who had once laughed carelessly under the sun. They were survivors. They were bound by something that no storm could ever tear apart. If this story moved you, please share it, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories of love, redemption, and hope.